All right.
Thanks.
Why do you support Trump?
Yeah. No. Well, first off, thank you for having me on, and sorry you're not feeling well. But yes, the reason I support Trump, grew up conservative. I don't vote based off of party lines. I like to vote based off of policies. Um, I like the tariff idea. I think it's been misconstrued, or some people don't necessarily know the economics behind it. So I got a BA in economics, but um, because of a lot of these countries ripping us off deal wise and not being able to come to the table and negotiate effectively, I think with the tariffs, it's more about going extreme to then bring them to the table to then have an actual discussion to try to renegotiate some of these trades. Um, but also too with tariffs, uh, the need or desire to want to bring manufacturing obviously back to America. Now, what we're seeing a lot of companies do is say, well, because we're getting hit with these tariff prices, now we're going to increase our prices. Typically in economics, the tariff is paid by the company, and that is then going to keep the price somewhat similar for the consumers. But because companies in a corporation state are wanting to, monopolize or capitalize off of this gain and then pass it off politically and say it's because of the tariffs we have to increase our prices versus actually moving manufacturing back. That to me, um, I'm sorry, my audio is bad. I'm just on
You might have to
my
turn off your
speaker.
Bluetooth.
Oh, good call. But yeah, there was a lot of different policies. I think trying to, create a smaller government. You may not agree, or you may you probably disagree with the overturning of Roe v. Wade. I think having less federal, government policies and having more state-based policies is more beneficial, just because there are so many different subcultures amongst the different states. You don't want to say something that's good for Californians is going to be good for Wyoming or Tennessee or Seattle. So I think that reduction of large government is a good point. But there's tons of different reasons why I voted for him. But wanted to let you
Okay.
jump in.
Few things here. I would push back on the idea that we're getting quote unquote ripped off, and also like that these are reciprocal or like trying to get us to like negotiate for the benefit of the American people. One, because Trump just recently reduced tariffs on Switzerland because they gave him a Rolex clock and a gold bar.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily sure. Obviously, there are things that are going on behind closed doors. I think the media does a good job of painting certain things in a certain light to produce a certain narrative. He may have gotten those things, but there perhaps is a different trade going on in the background that we're not necessarily let in the loop in yet, which is more than likely what is happening.
Okay, so there's just like some magical possible explanation, or it
No,
seems
no,
like to me
I
that
don't
he's clearly
necessarily
accepting
think.
it.
Sorry,
Does at least seem to be that he's accepting a bribe.
I don't necessarily think so. I mean, they're more than likely, as you know, in politics, there are things that go on behind closed doors, and just because the optic is going to be that way, it doesn't necessarily mean that is the truth. Things
Well, can you tell
obviously
me
take time within government.
what did we get out of reducing the tariffs?
What I'm saying is I don't know this topic off the top of my head in terms of that specific instance with Switzerland, but what I'm saying is just take it for face value with the optic of, well, they gave me a gift, so now I'm going to drop the tariff. Obviously, that if that is the case, then that is to be criticized, but I don't necessarily believe that is the case. I think as time goes on, we will find out the inner
Well, you're
workings
not
of
sure
that
yet
deal.
because you haven't looked into it yet. So maybe you might refrain from
Well,
making
no,
a
no. What I'm
determination
saying
on
is
that. But I
we don't have full transparency in government from everything that's going on from a day-to-day basis, right? We usually find things out after the fact or once things have closed. So I'm sure that there is going to be some news of a deal being brokered between that, whether there is some trade compensation. I don't think it would be primarily based off of some kind of trade. But I will be the
okay.
first one to say that if that is the case, that is a criticism that I would have with someone doing that. I wouldn't sit here and say, that's okay because it's him. Absolutely, we'll call balls balls and strikes strikes.
Okay. Yeah. So, and that would indicate that he would not be negotiating for the American people, but instead negotiating for bribery for himself.
If that
Uh,
was the case, then yeah, but more than
sure.
likely with a trade like that, there's obviously going to be news of something coming in the back end.
Yeah. Okay. So I also wanted to address other claims that you made. So in terms of the bringing back manufacturing, since Trump's got in office, we've actually seen a decline in real domestic manufacturing investment within the country. Because
Hmm.
when we place universal tariffs, not just targeted ones, it causes there to be an increase in the cost of domestic manufacturing within the country, because many of the aspects of the production process come from countries around the world, and that
Yeah, so
causes inflationary pressure, and we haven't seen
yeah,
an
I
upward
think I
trend in
think
that.
becoming more reliant, also with just how our governmental system is set up to where we fluctuate between parties every 4 to 8 years. Um, if I was a business owner and I had, products being made overseas for cheap with cheap labor and product and the raw materials being cheaper overseas as well,
Yeah.
I would pass the tariff on to the people and blame a political entity if that gave me more money. However, personally, I wouldn't do that. But I'm just playing the devil's advocate in the sense of that's what their thought process is. However, initial costs are going to be increased, correct? However, once we become more reliant and self-reliant on things, we would be able to drop those costs and be more reliant versus having these raw materials be
I don't
super
see
cheap
any
overseas.
evidence that it would get us to drop those costs because it reduces innovation. Because now we're not competing with the globe. We're just competing in the American market to a greater extent.
Well,
So
no,
that
that would be
reduces
that.
competition and reduces innovation. So if your idea is that competition is specifically going to drive innovation, well, if we reduce competition here, well, then wouldn't we reduce innovation?
I don't necessarily believe so. I think what we're also talking about is two
What?
different things, right? Where you're saying that if we were to bring manufacturing back into the United States, we're now only competing within ourselves. We can still be exporting
Wait,
goods
can
and
I tell you
competing
something?
on that level.
Did you know that there was a massive increase in domestic manufacturing investment under the Biden-Harris administration because of the policies that they engaged in? So why don't you take Biden's approach rather than Trump's approach? Because
Yeah,
clearly it
I don't
seems that Biden's approach is
necessarily.
better.
It may have appeared better short term, but what I think is taking a bunch of tax funds and reallocating it that way to try to boost that isn't necessarily the right way to go. However, I think that
That
you
alongside
know,
targeted tariffs, yeah, that's the best way to do it, is to ensure that
well,
we have a increase in domestic manufacturing investment.
the whole idea behind the tariffs is to obviously is to move manufacturing back to the United States by not having to have all increase in costs by bringing goods in. And we're seeing some car manufacturers, for example, start developing factories within the United States versus importing from Mexico. There's
Okay, so
because
then
of
we
the
don't see that in terms of domestic manufacturing investment, though. That's what I'm telling you. We would see it there if that was true.
no, with the investment, what I'm trying to get at with the investment component is if you're a business owner and you see that Republicans with Trump specifically have a 3 year left, political power within the executive office, you might hold out for those 3 years, hoping that someone else, like a Democrat, were to get in to reverse those policies and those tariffs to then keep manufacturing out. If there was a foreseen future of say 20 to 50 years of these tariffs existing, it would cost more money over time to keep importing versus moving labor and manufacturing into the U.S.
So you're saying it might slightly bring some companies to the American markets in domestic markets, but what you're not understanding is that it reduces the level that we'd be trading with countries around the world because they're going to place tariffs back on us in terms of retaliation. Think about it this way: Donald Trump wants to retaliate to negotiate. Isn't that the exact same thing that other countries would think about, specifically
They
whenever we
they might
impose a tariff?
absolutely do that.
Which is
They might
exactly what has
absolutely do
happened
that.
historically, which then destroys our industries and exports, sending that to other countries around the world, right? And
Not
we're paying more in terms
necessarily.
of consumers, and it's a regressive negative impact because people who are lower and middle income, they spend a greater proportion of their income on consumer products. So if you're increasing the cost of consumer products, that will disproportionately negatively impact lower and middle income individuals who previously aren't being taxed, right, to the same degree. So it's actually an increase in taxes for lower and middle income individuals, and then you're replacing that the income tax
With the
again, a
tariffs.
reduction in income tax. Income tax is progressive. meaning that people who are higher income, they spend a greater proportion of their income. So what you're doing is you're replacing a progressive tax structure with an regressive tax structure of tariffs, because you're trying
So
to
you
shift the burden.
so if I just want to understand your point. You're saying because of the tariffs, we are now imposing a tax on the middle class and lower class.
To a greater extent, disproportionately, yeah.
To an extent because of the companies, not because of the tariffs themselves. The tariffs themselves is a cost
And this is how the
to
companies
companies
respond to the tariffs.
but the companies are responding in this way because they're
Yes,
trying to profit as much as possible. Where
exactly. Like, I'm sorry,
no,
that's how capitalism works. Every
I
company has
understand.
a profit maximizing condition. You know
Of
this.
course, of course, the main goal of a company is to maximize profits. What I'm saying though, as a collective, as people, we have the power collectively. If all of us didn't buy from Amazon one day because we wanted to drive prices down for Prime memberships, we have that power collectively. But because we are so disenfranchised with this idea that we're just going to take it and have to eat this cost, then of course the argument comes, well, now we're increasing cost of living for all these people
So
based on
why
the
do you want to
tariffs.
reduce competition for those American firms that are large?
I don't think
Because
bringing
it
in
would cost more for like these small companies to do that in the context of America. So it's just going to decrease the level of competition, and it's going to give them
I
more
don't
power to exploit that level of market share.
I don't see bringing back manufacturing to the United States as what you're saying in terms of driving down competition because of foreign trade with people accepting our goods and then putting tariffs on that. I think the whole idea is to bring back jobs and bring back products within the US to become more sustainable versus to have to rely on foreign countries and their labor and their raw materials and then importing them. So if we can become more reliant on our own and our own goods and our own people and
Why
our
do we
own
need to do that?
services.
Why do we need to do that in terms of our? Why do we need to do that? I just don't understand. Why would
No,
we
I no,
reduce our overall trading capacity on a global stage and the level of competition that our businesses have to do that? It makes no sense. I don't understand what your reasoning
but
is there.
how are we dropping our competition and decreasing our trade by bringing things home? We're cutting the costs of our
Because you're
goods.
reducing the level of trade that we're going to have with countries around the world.
Well, no, that's on the assumption that because we're not
Don't you think that if you have a restriction in the market, that's going to impose like a reduction in the level of trade?
I don't believe that moving manufacturing back to the United States would not allow us to have a good trade with
Well,
foreign
you're
countries.
assuming that this manufacturing is going to come back specifically because of only this tariffs, which we have not seen yet. We genuinely have
No,
not
no,
seen this
the
yet.
tariffs, and we can discuss other topics. I know you're not feeling super well, but specifically on the tariffs, I think that with what we're doing to bring back manufacturing jobs and to try to incentivize companies to be building within our
How's the
border and
jobs
with
report?
our country.
How are the jobs reports doing? We see increasing unemployment.
Well, you also have to take in consideration there are a lot of other variables as well where you have a lot of, as you pointed out earlier, a company's main goal is to maximize profits, and with new technology and AI and things like that,
So
people are
deregulate it
going.
more?
I don't think it deregulates it.
Well, Trump wants to deregulate it more.
With what policy or with what has he
Well,
said
they
in
don't
regard to that?
specify, but that's what he wants to do.
But how can you make that assumption if there's been no proposed policy?
Oh my God, that's because he literally has been saying that he wants to do this, but he doesn't have a proposed policy. Like, think about
No,
it
I
this
mean
way.
people
That's like
people can
us saying
say
that.
they want certain. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, he said you're saying he could say he wants it, but he doesn't actually want to do it. So why would he
I
say it when
think
he's
there's
president?
I think there's certain tactics, right, where because of how media and how things are perceived, as well as the consensus or the sentiment of people within the country, I think that you can say one thing to try to stir up or create an issue, which may have been the case that way, but until there is proposed policy to deregulate and do those things, then I would have the conversation in terms of actual factual policies being implemented.
Okay, no, but like, does that not at least identify what his proposed position is on it comparative to like the other position? What it would be from Democrats who would want to regulate?
I mean, with how China is excelling in the AI market and trying to be competitive in that component, I think there is some type of freedom that needs to be let loose. However, there is going to be contradictions or problems by doing that. But how else
So
would you
we need
recommend being
environmental
competitive?
restrictions. We need environmental restrictions to ensure that people aren't negatively impacted. You can have innovation, you can invest in innovation without it negatively disenfranchising people because we can impose regulations.
I mean, totally understandable. I think the way they're going about it right now with AI and everything, you have to be somewhat fast and loose, but also too, we're kind of set up behind the eight ball with AI, with how our electrical grid and everything's kind of been structured anyway. So you kind of have to fight and choose your battles with how we can advance and try to be competitive in that market. So there's a lot of different ways to kind of look at that or approach it. So. But yeah, there's other reasons besides the tariffs that I voted for Trump. If you wanted to get into those,
Well, there's a few things here. Tariffs, like again, you didn't address the idea that it's shifting the burden of taxation from a progressive tax structure to a regressive tax structure. Do you at least agree that
but
is
it's not a
happening?
tax. It's not a tax. It's not a
It
tax
is.
on
Tariffs are a
the American
tax.
people.
Yes, it
It's
is.
a tax on trade on imported goods. It
Which
should have
causes an
no
increase
bear.
in the prices for American people. So inevitably, who's paying that tax?
Totally understandable. However, you don't have to buy these goods if the prices aren't for you, right? In the sense that
What?
there are a
Yes, you
lot
do.
of.
Because what other options do you have? If it increases the cost of products in the market, what other options do
What
you
I'm
have? You
saying
only
is
have an
you
option
can
to go
find
and
alter you
invest
can
in the market, or and to go and
you can
buy things in the
find
market.
alternative goods just because a product that you use on a day-to-day
Alternative
basis
goods,
goes up.
which you could have done otherwise, right? Why? So when you impose a tariff, it reduces the level of alternative goods. Did you know that?
Unless there's a good being manufactured within the United States that can then
Which
compete
that could have
against those.
already happened. That could have already happened without the tariff implemented.
Yes, but
Why is that not happening right now?
to say the company's greed of wanting to increase costs because now they're being hit versus moving, right? They're being taxed because they're importing goods versus manufacturing and not having to deal with that tax or with that tariff. So the whole idea to say that
Which
we are
reduces
taxing and
options and
increase.
increases prices. That's my point.
But the options are to manufacture within the United States. So if an American-made company were to compete with these companies that are increasing prices, people would then switch to that new product.
So you're
This
saying,
idea that,
yeah, they'll switch to
sorry,
but they could have already switched that product right now. I don't understand how a tariff being implemented would make it cheaper. You understand
so
that it
the
would make it more
tariff is
expensive,
going
right?
to the tariff is
If it doesn't make it
increasing.
more expensive,
No.
then how would there be an increase in domestic manufacturing investment?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, how would there not be an increase in domestic manufacturing jobs if there wasn't an increase in prices?
I just don't believe. Obviously, there is a barrier to entry with costs for starting up a company within the United States and certain different goods. However, this idea that tariffed goods and the companies passing along that cost to the consumer, that's not, even though it is indirectly affecting them, doesn't mean that as citizens that we have to buy that tariff good. We can find alternatives that are at a cheaper cost. And I totally understand
We
with what
could
your argument is.
listen. It's reducing the alternatives. If you reduce the level of goods in the market because you're reducing the level of imported goods, that increases the price. A reduction in supply with the same level of demand, what happens to the price?
But you can make that back up by manufacturing more within the
Yeah, but
country.
that takes time to happen. Okay.
No, 100%. What I'm saying is there is a short term increase in costs. And as
by
this
the way,
policy were to
if
be,
it were cheaper to produce that good in the United States, it would have already been happening. So we
I don't
know that
necessarily
not
think
only
so.
is it more expensive, yes, that is true. What do
Well,
you mean? That's
in
how
the
a
sense
market
that
works. That's how the free market works. If it were cheaper to produce in the United States at the same level of quality, they'd be doing that because
no, I
that would
understand
give
that.
them more
What I'm
profit.
saying, what I'm saying though is if labor over in China is 10 cents an hour versus in America where we want to have a livable wage at say $16, $17 an hour,
then
That's
why,
not even
if
what the minimum wage is here.
well, sorry, I'm just, that was based off previous, not, however, what I'm saying is if the raw materials in both countries are the same, right, we're able to get those same materials at the same cost, a country that is making them foreignly with cheaper labor, of course they're going to want to do it foreignly because the cost of labor is cheaper and they can maximize profits versus paying an American to do the same thing.
Okay,
So
so
what would,
saying,
we need, sorry, go ahead.
okay, what you're not understanding is that if your idea is that you want to reduce the likelihood of there being exploitation in the context of the goods that we're getting, well, then you can place tariffs on the specific goods that are coming from areas in which have that particular exploitation. But that's not what's happening.
No, he's
That's not
doing.
what we're doing. We're literally placing tariffs on every country around the world. What are you
No, yeah,
talking about? That's not
exactly.
what the plan is here. So when
The
you're doing
reason.
that, actually what you're doing is you're just causing an incentive for these areas to actually reduce labor standards so that they can still try to compete in the market with the higher cost of trade.
But what we're saying is because he's the argument that he's doing these giant blanket tariffs versus going in and doing specific ones to target these things that we're discussing
And that's
is
what the
in
Democrats
order.
advocate for is targeted tariffs.
You ever been with a parent like when you were a child and wanting to buy something and you over exaggerate the price to then undersell and then be like, well, actually, it's not $1,000, it's $300 to make it look more appealing. That's what's going on with these tariffs of making them look exaggerated to foreign countries to bring them to the table to then renegotiate. If you come out with what you want at the
Well, we
beginning,
haven't really got any things in terms of renegotiation, and you're still imposing a greater tariff than existed prior.
but we need to be recouping some of those funds that we are, from the companies internally that we're exporting or that we're importing from other countries.
Wait, say that again?
We still need to be recouping some of the funds. So although there is now a new tariff, there is a new deal going on. We need to be positioning ourselves in foreign trade to be in a better position than we currently were before Trump.
Yeah, so I don't think that the tariffs put us in a better position, and I'm confused how you gave us an argument that it does put us in a better position, because there haven't been any trade deals I would say have led to better conditions in terms of trade that you'd be able to point to, and still the fact that there'd be tariffs imposed would reduce the level of trade. And then if it's for renegotiation, then how are you going to bring back domestic manufacturing to the country? So it seems like the goal is not bringing back domestic manufacturing if you're advocating that they are just for like renegotiation.
I think it can be twofold in the sense that the immediate large tariff is trying to incentivize or create the demand to want to move companies that have the agility to move back as quick as possible to move back.
But if it changes around and doesn't stay where it is, then how does that going to affect expectations in a positive manner?
I still think there's going to be an increase in imported goods, so it would be looking at the bottom line and then see.
An increase in imported goods if we're going to impose a tariff?
Yeah, if we're importing,
That's incoherent. To say that you're going to tax imported goods, but then there's going to be an increase in the level of imported goods is insane.
No, we wouldn't be increasing our imported goods. We would be increasing our exported goods because then we're making more. So we would also
No,
be able
because
to
the countries around the world placed retaliatory tariffs on us, therefore reducing our exports. There's no evidence that we're increasing exports because of the imposition of tariffs. That's ridiculous.
They're placing the tariffs directly back onto us based on the premise of these exaggerated tariffs. But then we go back and then have a discussion to then come to a trade agreement that benefits both countries.
But you understand that there's still the tax imposed, and it's not going to benefit us overall comparative to what it would have been otherwise, because we could have an increased level of trade if there wasn't an imposition of tariffs in the first place. And also, you still have your Bluetooth on.
Sorry about the quality. I think I just had clicked the shortcut. Sorry about that. Yeah, I mean, we're more than likely not going to agree on the tariffs, which is totally fine. But there are other reasons that I voted for him as well.
Okay. What makes you think that?
Yeah, a big component was immigration with decreasing the amount of illegal immigrants or undocumented. I know the left likes to use that, but crossing illegally, I think is not right. And the fact that we need to know who is in our country. I don't necessarily agree with the optic that is going on right now with the raids. However, kicking out or removing illegal aliens would be the best plan.
Okay. So I don't think that the mass deportation process that Trump's engaged in is good. My particular position on immigration is that if someone's in the country undocumented, they have not committed a violent crime or bad crime, they should be given a pathway to citizenship if they haven't, again, committed a violent crime or bad crime, where they don't have to leave the country. I think that would incentivize a better system where we're actually focused on like the safety and security rather than being focused on deporting people who are just like family members, like working to like benefit their communities. So I don't really see a reason to like restrict, those that have not committed violent crimes or bad crimes from being in the country.
Yeah, I think the amnesty route out of the gate creates that incentive of like the slap on the wrist, but still getting away with the behavior. I think
I mean, you
for
do that when you vote
nonviolent.
for a convicted criminal, right? You voted for a convicted felon who didn't get held accountable and put in prison because of the fact that he literally was elected president. And then he also violates the law when deporting people because he's violating people's due process rights to a greater extent. And he's constantly, on multiple different occasions, violated the law. While
There was a
president.
lot to unpack from that, so I'm not sure necessarily which one you would like me to go down. But with the
Go for it.
convicted felon component, within New York state law, that what he was convicted of would be misdemeanors, and they
Nope.
were chalked up.
Nope, it's a
Okay.
felony. Not only is it a felony because of the predicate crime, but even if it were a misdemeanor, that's then comparative to an undocumented immigrant who came into the country unlawfully because that's a misdemeanor.
Well, now you're comparing apples to oranges with committing a misdemeanor versus entering illegally.
That's a
They may
misdemeanor.
have they are perhaps both misdemeanors. However, as a country, we need to know who is in our borders. And what I was going to say earlier before that whole kind of side tangent was, the offering of the ability to be able to rejoin and come back in legally as an option versus just granting amnesty. I don't necessarily believe that is the route to go. I think if you were to be able to offer easier transport out of the country and have it be a little bit nicer than being slammed into a van or however they're doing it currently, that might be a better way. However, just giving amnesty to nonviolent, we need to know who's here and we need to know their background. But also, too, the reason that having people come in mass groves from foreign countries is working within the economy and then taking the revenue that they're making from their jobs and then taking it out of the economy and going to foreign countries.
So amnesty includes a vetting process, and it would ensure that the most amount of people are vetted as possible. And ICE detains over 70% of the people that they've detained have literally no prior criminal offenses, right?
No,
So
that's totally fine, but
the idea that like
sorry.
that they should be focused on people who are not a threat to our community, I think is absurd. And they would be able to focus on those that are like the murderers and the rapists and the ones that are actually a threat to our community, right? If it is the case that they were to actually what's it called, not or actually not go after people who have not committed violent crimes or bad crimes and give them mass amnesty.
Yeah, I think the violent criminals, obviously you get rid of them and deport them. The non-violent and non-criminal, even though committing the illegal crossing is the misdemeanor, sorry. I think allowing them to be able to be on the list for citizenship after the fact versus just giving them, outright amnesty, then you're going to incentivize, well, if I come here and I'm not a violent criminal, I'm just going to get amnesty eventually, which then incentivizes these crossings at a higher rate.
Well, it's still a vetting process that you go through, right? A legal process, and I want to make that legal process quicker. So how about we
But
take the money that they're investing into militarizing ICE and let's put that money into literally making this country a safer place and a better place for everyone, including immigrants, by making there a faster and quicker legal immigration process.
So then here's a question for you, because I don't think I've seen you, discuss this in previous media forums. Why do we need this large amount of immigration for the country, in your opinion?
Well, I think it's I'm not. It's not necessarily that we're like saying that we needed, but we're saying that like this is the best policy, the most humane policy, alongside the fact that you could, in a certain sense, say that like people are immigrating to the country are needed because we have been below replacement rates for fertility rates for like the past 50 years, and
which is
inevitably it's
a
going to
whole
be the
nother.
case that are older, that
Yeah.
the population is going to be disproportionately older on Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, are in different types of programs that people rely on when they're older, right?
Yeah. No, understandable.
So,
Understandable.
like, which means that there's going to be less young people who are working, funding the system for people who are older. So if you want specifically to be able to fund, the systems that we've had historically speaking, well, then we should have an immigration process that is quicker, so that there are more young people to be able to, pay for all the older people that need access to the care that we think that they should get access to.
But now what we're doing, because with politics and the country, there's different components that then feed onto each other. So you're going to be using the idea of increasing immigration for a great replacement when we should be incentivizing.
Don't say that. The great replacement is crazy. That's a dog whistle. That's a white supremacist dog whistle.
But you just described, because or Americans right now aren't reproducing at a rate to sustain our current population.
Yes, I'm saying
we
I'm
now
saying
need
that
to import
there
more
needs to be
people.
more immigration so that we can help people.
Why not have more kids?
I don't know. Why do you see this as replace? I don't know what you mean.
Because as
Like,
a
when
society,
you have children, is that replacing?
it's replacing in a way, in the sense
Okay,
that
so then that's ridiculous. So then you think that having children is a quote unquote great replacement? That's absurd.
No.
The idea that you're referencing it is in the context of where like a white supremacists are saying white people, that there's a reduction in the amount of white people.
No, it has
in the
nothing to do
country,
with race.
right? And
I
it's
never
gonna
mentioned
make
race.
the country less than 50%. Well, the great replacement, that's what it means. If you didn't mean to say that, well, then I'm just telling you what it does mean, so you probably should refer to it.
I
using
appreciate
that,
it. I didn't
because
mean
that's
the
what
great
people see it
replacement.
as.
I meant a great replacement in the sense that we are going to be replacing
Sure.
a large amount of
Sure, I
society.
just want to let you
in a
know that
great-
that's like a
I
coined
appreciate it. Yeah,
term.
that's not.
It's like
I'm not talking about white people. What I'm talking about is this idea that Americans, whatever race, should be reproducing at a higher rate than, which then feeds into the immigration thing. And to say that the solution to the lower birthing rates is to import more foreign people, I don't believe that as the solution, because then they're also
is to
taking,
allow for more people to come to the country if they want to come here. Yeah, that's why.
If they
why
can
is
come
that,
here
why is that a bad
legally-
thing? Yeah, well, I'm
if they
saying
can
a
come here
quick-
legally.
Yeah, I'm saying a
that's
quicker legal
fine.
process. Yeah, I'm saying a quicker legal process. What's wrong with
But
that?
that doesn't just automatically give, and we should not just automatically give amnesty, because then that incentivizes, well, if I'm not a violent criminal and I illegally come over, I'll just be given citizenship, even though there might
No,
be
no,
a
there's a
small
vetting
amount
process.
of background
There's
check.
a vetting
So why
process,
can't they
yeah.
wait in Mexico while we do that? Why
Okay,
can't we
well-
move them back to Mexico or
Why are you
whatever
assuming that
country
only
they
people are coming from Mexico?
Well, okay, that's not what I meant. I was going to explain. With the other countries, including Mexico, having them be in the countries that they immigrated or illegally immigrated from, and then doing the vetting process that way. That would be. I don't see the difference between just giving them that amnesty as a human rights violation. Removing them and allowing them to come back in, because there are other people that are on the list that are doing it the legal way, and that kind of undercuts what they're going through. Although
No, it
there
doesn't.
is a
No, it
way.
doesn't. That's like the age-old argument that we shouldn't provide public education because it is the case that other people had to pay for it privately, right? Other parents had to pay for their kids to have private education throughout their younger years. So it would be unfair to all the people that had to pay for it if we had a public education system, right, that literally made sure that everyone had access to it without having to pay.
I don't see the comparison between free public education and private school versus the illegally crossing amnesty to someone that's in line doing it the legal
It's
way. I don't see the
making
comparison.
the system better. We acknowledge that our system takes too long right now, and people have come to our country undocumented who should have been able to come to our country through the legal process quickly, but weren't able to because our legal process takes so long. So
then
it's
why
actually
not
a fault of
attack
our
the-
issue? It's a fault of our legal immigration process.
So then why not attack the process of immigration versus just giving mass amnesty? Because we need to know who's here.
I think that's a part of the process.
Yeah, I just fundamentally disagree. I think having
Why?
you know-
What's wrong with someone? Or how does it harm you for someone to be in the country who hasn't committed a violent crime or bad crime? Who's undocumented? How does that harm you?
I believe it sends the wrong signals to foreign countries in the sense that you can break, even though it is a misdemeanor, you can break the law and come here and we will give you amnesty versus saying, hey, if you commit the crime illegally and you're a non-violent criminal and we deport you back, you can still have that ability to come back by going through the proper channels. I don't see how that would be,
We're giving
worse
you a
off.
proper channel for someone who's in the country, and then we're also saying for people who are coming to our country, we're also giving you a quicker channel. So it's quicker for both sides. Why is that an issue? Name one way.
I think
revisit.
I think
because you're saying if it's just someone unlawfully being in the country, well then if you're referencing that, well Donald Trump literally is violating the law and deporting them without due process, and that's violating constitutionally protected rights. So,
but the constitutional rights are for U.S. citizens.
Why do you only care about undocumented immigrants violating the law, but not your president?
This is just a complete straw man in the sense that I'm not talking about Trump and right now. I'm talking about illegal immigration and the logic behind it, right? You're saying that we need to replace our citizens because of the birth rate, and we need to just give amnesty to anyone that's here that's a non-violent criminal. And what I'm saying is
who hasn't committed a violent crime or bad crime?
Pardon?
Who hasn't committed a violent crime or bad crime? Yeah, absolutely. What's wrong with
I
that?
think they're still committing a crime.
So?
That's still
You're
so. If you have two
right
people in front of you,
illegal app that's just not being enforced by the Trump administration.
If you have two people and one is still committed a misdemeanor,
listen, you're on an app that's banned.
That has nothing to do with my argument. What I'm saying is,
and you're using it right now.
You're making arguments against something that I'm not discussing. What I'm saying is you have one person who is willing to commit a misdemeanor, and you have another person who's foreign who's not willing to do that and go through the legal channels. As a country, I would believe that we would want the person that is coming through legitimately versus someone that thinks that they can break the law to do what they want. By giving illegal immigrants that have committed no violent crimes,
are you saying it's
amnesty?
Psychological? If you let people off who have committed crimes, it's going to create a psychological effect that people are going to commit more crimes. Is that your point?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
That you'd be doing that to a greater extent with Donald Trump in the position of presidency, especially with the fact that he
again, I'm discussing the logical argument,
patriots, and that he called for the execution of literally people in the context of Congress, like Mark Kelly, who literally just said, follow the Constitution and don't follow unlawful orders.
Yeah, I'm not discussing Trump right now. I'm discussing immigration with logic in the sense that you keep wanting to derail and bring in outside things than what we're discussing.
What do you mean outside things? We are talking about Trump. What is the title of the live stream?
No, totally understand. But because we're talking about immigration, which is the reason why I voted.
I would love for you to read it off real quick. What is the title of the live stream?
Just because the title has to deal with Trump and we're talking about a policy in which I voted for him on, bringing in others topics of him to try to defute what I'm saying right now is not going against what is not an argument against what I'm saying. In relation
to other things that Donald Trump has done to see if you still support him, even though he's committed these other things.
I'm not talking about the logic of Donald Trump. What I'm talking about is the logic of a policy of not giving amnesty. Because if, for example, if you give amnesty to a nonviolent illegal immigrant, and you say, hey, you did it illegally, here's a slap on the wrist, we're going to give you amnesty, we're going to give you citizenship. Don't you believe that that would incentivize others to perform the exact same thing versus going through the legal channel?
It's going to create so you're saying letting off someone on committing a crime is going to create a psychological effect where people feel like they can commit more crimes. And I'm just saying the Trump administration and Trump himself does that to a significantly greater extent. Not only has he been convicted of 34 felonies and he got away with that himself because he literally wasn't held accountable in the context of a criminal court and put in prison because he literally was elected president, alongside the fact that he was held civilly liable of sexual abuse yet still got into the position of president. He tried to overturn the 2020 election and sent false slates of electors to electoral college to cast Trump votes when he didn't win to try to steal the election in 2020, right? And he tried to pressure Mike Pence to do so, and he literally failed.
You're bringing up things that have nothing to do with immigration. That's what I'm saying is that you can't make the argument against what I'm saying because
I have a million times. I'm saying that he violates the law in so many different ways, and you don't really care.
But that's not what we're discussing.
And that is going to reinforce those things. Reinforce people committing crimes in those different types of acts, right? If you're saying that committing these actions is going to reinforce a psychological effect of people doing this to a greater extent, well, then Donald Trump calling for the execution of Democrats in Congress is going to reproduce that to a greater extent, correct?
Yeah, I know nothing
speaking,
about
within the
that
population. I can
Yeah,
show you a video of Donald Trump literally.
That's totally fine. What I'm saying
the
though
tweets
is
that he
this has
literally posted a few
nothing.
days ago.
This has nothing to do
It does.
with the argument that I brought up.
You're saying psychological impact based upon the fact that you're letting someone get away with committing a particular crime. And if you didn't believe that this had happened to the extent that you're referencing, well, then you would care about it to a greater extent in reference to Donald Trump. Now you don't care about this in all circumstances. We don't care about this in trespassing, or not trespassing, in the situations in which people, what's it called, jaywalk. If it's not a threat to someone's safety and security and you jaywalk, we don't give a shit. And just because we don't enforce that law doesn't mean that other laws aren't enforced. So you understand that just because you don't enforce a particular law doesn't mean that there's an idea that there's not an enforcement of any laws. It's just that there's not an enforcement of that particular law in that particular manner based upon the fact that people haven't committed violent crimes and bad crimes, which is intentional for those that are in the country that haven't committed violent crimes and bad crimes and are undocumented, so they can go through the legal process so that they don't have to live a life specifically where they're exploited, where they're literally living under, or trying to go into the shadows to a greater extent so they don't get deported, so that they aren't identified by authorities. Right, we're giving them an incentive to identify themselves to authorities and to go through a vetting process. So under my position, we are not only going to vet more people going to the country through the legal process quicker, but we're also going to vet those that are already in the country undocumented that are currently not vetted.
Yeah, I just think that it sends a weak signal to other people that want to commit this crime or do this act versus deporting them and saying you can go on the list, but then, working together bipartisanly to discuss the immigration policies and how we can improve that if we need to. Comparing.
Well, then tell me why you're okay with Donald Trump violating the law and deporting people by not utilizing due process rights when he expanded expedited removal to everyone within the country that's been within the jurisdiction of the country that within the past 2 years, whereas previously it was everyone within the country that was within 100 miles of a border that was within the country for less than 2 weeks. You understand that's a massive expansion to expedited removal, which disproportionately is going to cause a reduction in the amount of due process rights that people have, right?
Yeah, we're just not going to agree on this, and I don't think
Wait, I'm sorry, but that's a violation of the law that apparently you just don't care about.
No, I don't. So, illegal immigrants don't have due process if they're here illegally.
According to the Constitution, they do.
Under what verbiage?
The 14th Amendment. It says everyone within the jurisdiction of the country is granted due process.
With the assumption of citizens.
And this has been clarified in the Supreme Court.
All right. Well, I'm just, I think being here illegally is you need to be deported. You need to go through the proper channels appropriately.
Okay, then you need to go through the proper channels to deport them. Due process.
Yeah, I don't agree.
So you're assuming that undocumented immigrants need to go through this legal process, but Trump doesn't need to go through the legal process. You're saying he's above the law.
No, they are here illegally. They are not supposed to be here. They need to be removed. They need to be deported and go to
they don't. They don't need to be deported. Our country's better if they stay, if they haven't committed a violent crime or bad crime, and they're given a pathway to citizenship.
But we're going to go in a circle again, because the sense that by giving them this mass amnesty, even though they haven't committed a crime or a violent crime,
we've already gone over this. There's so many.
No, exactly.
You just aren't willing to acknowledge all the different ways that the Trump administration reinforces violating the law, and you're not willing to acknowledge that. Someone from your own side could be like, every single time Trump violates the law in terms of any constitutional basis, that literally creates a precedence where literally the left could do it, and then that could literally lead to us getting our ideology passed to a significantly greater extent. So someone from your own side could reductio your own position and show you the absurdities of allowing for Donald Trump to violate the constitutionally protected rights that Americans have to a greater extent and literally not abide by what the Supreme Court says and to violate Supreme Court orders, because the same very thing could set precedence for the ideological opposing views of yours to do the exact same thing when it comes to us getting into office the next time.
All right. Yeah, I don't. Making the conflation with Trump and his supposed breaking of these crimes, How I just don't get it.
What's confusing?
Yeah, the idea that by picking up illegal immigrants and driving them and putting them outside of our border is violating due process when they don't have due process to begin with,
They
even
do.
though you say the 14th
The
Amendment.
Constitution
Yeah, I
grants
don't.
that. You just didn't read
Yeah.
the Constitution.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I did.
Yeah, seriously, I'm being serious. If you read the Constitution, it says anyone within the country has due process. How do you identify that someone's committed a crime if you don't give them due process for committing that crime?
The crime is they're not a U.S. citizen. They're not here legally.
Do tourists get due process if they commit a crime? Because they're not a U.S. citizen.
Say that again.
Do tourists get due process? Like when they commit a crime, do they get due process? They're not citizens.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting point. It's in the sense that I guess it would just depend on the crime, right? If they're here illegally,
What do you mean depend on the crime? So at least in some circumstances, you would say that non-citizens should be able to get access to due process. So constitutionally, you at least acknowledge that to some extent. But if you actually read the 14th Amendment, you would know that it literally established that, not only the 14th, but the 5th.
yeah, I just think it. Yeah, yeah. That's yeah. I don't have anything
And
else
if
to
you don't
say.
need to give due process rights to undocumented immigrants, couldn't you just claim someone's undocumented and not give them due process and just deport them?
No, because you would they would obviously be evidence that they're a citizen or they were documented.
But you don't go through that to check that if you don't go through due process.
So then, how do they know these people are illegal?
It's based upon their own
immigrants?
determinations and judgments, without going.
And they're not comparing this
And
to a master list.
I could make a judgment where I just deport, Elon Musk, or I deport Donald Trump. Send him to Mars.
Yeah, the argument, they're still, even though they're not
That was a joke, by the way.
No, totally understand. It was a good impression. With the due process, right? They're checking if they are documented immigrants. They're not just grabbing anyone and throwing them in a van and driving them across the border.
Okay. You understand that there is a violation of due process rights because they're not going to the context court systems, and they absolutely are just kidnapping people. They absolutely are violating people's rights in terms of access to, literally, you have to provide a warrant, identification, right? You have to understand that literally they are kidnapping people and they are throwing them out of the country. Their loved ones can't identify where they are not getting actually legitimate determinations on where they are. There's backlogged information for that, so it's actually they have no clue where they are. So they're literally missing because their loved ones can't identify where they are. And their due process rights are being violated. So come on. Understand that this is actively harming many people, and because it specifically hasn't impacted you, right? It shouldn't mean that you can't acknowledge that it has impacted other people and that you care that it has. Because actively speaking, these are violations of the law that you're just completely and totally overlooking that have a negative impact on the safety and security of people within this country. Okay? People are they feel less safe. They are less safe in this country because of ICE, because of the border enforcement that Donald Trump's engaged in, because of the lack of due process rights, because of the racial profiling.
But they are checking if they're a citizen or not. They're not just randomly grabbing people that fit a certain criteria.
That you can't be detained. That doesn't mean that you can't be detained if you're a U.S. citizen. U.S. citizens have been detained.
Okay.
Without due process. You know that, right? And also there have been
They've been detained without due process.
Yes. There was an explicit circumstance where someone was going to work and they literally were trying to drive their car to work, and they literally, the cops all went all around them and they literally limited them and they took them to prison, and they didn't even get access to an attorney for 3 days, right? And they missed their kid's birthday. Right, I watched it. I was on Jubilee recently, and they showed us a specific video of this happening. Right, and within 3 days, they should be able to have identified that they were just trying to go to work and they were here legally. It's absurd. That is insane.
But you're saying that they're not given the due process.
You can't sit there and tell me that that's justified. It is so absurd.
if I fit the suspect or demographic of a murderer and I'm detained and the process goes and it is determined that I am not that person, that just is the matter of fact.
But
Being
you can't tell
upset
me
that
that
I
this
missed.
isn't insane. This isn't just being detained. This is like him being held, or them being held for 3 days, right? Without power of attorney. And people are being racially profiled. So just because of their race, right? They're literally being detained. That wouldn't have happened otherwise. Okay? You understand that?
So then question
That's not
for you.
okay, right? You should not be able to like just be okay. You shouldn't just like that's absurd.
So question for you. If the process of deporting the illegal immigrants was different than it is currently right now, then you would be in favor
I
of
still
deport.
disagree with that, right? Because I don't want to deport those that haven't committed violent crimes or bad crimes, but I would prefer that they get due process to them not getting due process. And them getting due process is a constitutionally protected right that they have. And it's important that we protect those constitutionally protected rights, such as due process, as these are fucking important and inherent. And like, if you commit a crime, you would want due process yourself. If you were to like
100%.
randomly be a person within the context of our society, you'd want due process for any crime that you are accused of committing.
Well, and to my understanding, because of the volume of people that they are deporting, that's why you're getting this lead time of 3 days of detainment where they are getting that due process in the sense that they are validating based off of who we have on record coming in if they are here legally or illegally. It's not that they're just then going to court and having to fight and do all these different things. The due process is the ability to prove that they're here legally. So the fact that they're being detained and then immigration is then checking to see if they are a citizen or not and then deporting them is the due process.
Okay, you're not understanding. It's what they're accused of and what the administration has judged or determined that to be the case. So I could make a claim if I'm the administration that like anyone I want is in the country undocumented and I can just deport them, right?
How?
Because you had no due process and it's just based on the judgment of
The
the
due process
administration.
is them checking your papers
Because
to see
it's
if you're on record.
literally just the executive branch making the determination through the context of ICE that they think that this is applicable to them. It is not a determination that is verified by another branch of government like the court system. What you're not understanding is that you are bypassing the checks and balances.
They have to go to court to prove that they are not.
Yes, you do. You have to verify this.
And they're not. You're saying that they're not verifying them while they're detaining
Yeah,
them.
it's not verified. Yeah, it's not verified. It's only just a Trump administration judgment or determination. Otherwise, it would be determined by another branch of government, the court process in this context.
Why do we need to be wasting taxpayer dollars if we have birth certificates, we have all the records to prove that
Because
you're a
we
citizen?
have, so are you essentially asking why should we have checks and balances in multiple branches of government, and why should we have a process that funds multiple branches of government? Is that seriously the question you're asking me?
No, what I'm saying is why do we have to then go through this circus of parading people that we know are here illegally and having to waste
Because that's a process of ensuring that we have checks and balances and that the Constitution is upheld because we're upholding the supreme law of the land, the Constitution.
I don't see how going to court to then prove something that government has, and then you're going to make the argument that well, the government
the
can fake
claims
facts.
and the judgments from the executive branch.
Yeah, if you're here legally and you don't have your documentation to show that you're here legally, the due process is confirming and being detained and confirming that you have citizenship or the right to be here. And if you don't belong here. You don't.
Wait, so if you just don't have your papers on you, are you saying that you'd be okay with them being deported?
Is that what I said?
Well, I'm just asking.
There are ways of identifying yourself. You have your passport. You have your stuff to be able to identify you if you're here legally.
What if you don't have it? What if you lost your passport?
And you have record of you requesting your passport back. You have to. It's a.
What if that happened? Let's assume a scenario where it happened recently and you haven't requested it yet. What if it just happened and then this happens and then you don't have it on you and you haven't requested it yet?
And we're talking about passports to then concur with your visa being here legally.
Yeah, let's say you don't have any method of identification on you. You cannot find any of your method of identification. Would you be okay with them being deported?
your country because other countries have ways of identifying you. They go through the channel to then confirm. They pull up the evidence and they say, okay, you are here. You misplaced your. It's not a just you don't have a document. Okay, bye, see ya, do bye. It's not how it is. That's
Okay,
just not how it's.
so, and you don't think there's any circumstance where someone could have lost all the papers, maybe in a flood or a fire, or they don't have any specific papers, and they lost everything, and they don't have any of their papers for methods of identification. And say if they lost that, listen, if they lost that, what would they be able to do under your perspective to be able to justify that?
Right. So
If it's from again a judgment from the Trump administration, not a judgment from the court system. I would say that the database in the system that we would require to verify that would rely upon us verifying that from a judicial perspective. Otherwise, right, there clearly could be enough of a basis for them to try to deport people who we think would have a legal basis in the country.
What I'm saying is, someone's here, they have all their papers, it falls into the Grand Canyon because they're a tourist. They get picked up by ICE. They have the ability to go through visas and obtain your identification from your foreign country and get all this information.
It takes long. The process takes really long. The same reason that you said that we shouldn't have to go through the court system, that it would cost too much and that it would take too long, are the exact reasons why people come to the country undocumented. So the very reasons that you use to justify your position in terms of deporting people without due process is actually a justification for undocumented immigrants to come to this country, so long as that they're not a threat to our safety and security.
I didn't say that we don't need to work on creating a better system for creating citizens from people that are applying legally. That's not what I said. I just said that if you're here illegally, you haven't committed a nonviolent crime, you will be deported and then have the ability to then re-register to get on the list to get citizenship. It's not a permanent ban. You're being removed from the country, and we're going to have you do it the legal way. Because if you come here the illegal way and we do a slap on the wrist and then we give you citizenship, it then incentivizes other people to say, well, I'm not a violent criminal.
You're just repeating the same talking point. Even though, we could point to, examples of Donald Trump doing so, like pardoning January 6th violent rioters who beat police officers.
Completely different topics than what we're discussing.
Completely different topics. You aren't even willing to address it.
I'm totally
you have to. We're making a compared analysis of what side you would want to support, right?
I'm discussing the logic of my argument of why illegal immigrants need to be deported. And what you're then doing is saying, well, it's going to create the...
I'm testing your logic, and I'm saying you, based upon your own reasoning, don't give a shit about this. But apparently that doesn't matter to you.
It's not what I'm... It's not even comparative to what I'm making the argument on. If you want to discuss January 6th and his, upcharge from misdemeanor to felony to then create this stigma around election time of, oh, you're electing a felon, we can have those discussions. But that has no bearing on saying the logic of giving a green light to people that are committing crimes will not incentivize
That's what
other
pardoning
people.
is. That's what pardoning is.
January 6th doesn't have anything to do with the immigration logic.
But you understand that it's going to incentivize crime to happen in this country to a greater extent, especially violent crime relating to politics?
Say that again?
You understand that it's going to increase the likelihood of violent crime relating to politics based upon the reasoning you provided in terms of because you allow for a crime to get away, that is going to increase the psychological prevalence of this?
I'm still not following the argument that you're saying.
Okay, all right. I'm going to get off. Is there anything else you want to talk about before I get off?
No, I mean, you were respectful. I totally understand. There's going to be different viewpoints, but I just don't agree with bringing in other instances of other policies and then try to defute my logical claims. But that's still...
Okay. All right. I appreciate you coming up.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. I'm going to get off for today. I want to say thank you to some people. I just got to catch up a little bit, but yeah, I definitely stayed on longer than I expected. I'm sorry for doing a shorter live today, everyone. I'm very sick. I honestly don't feel great. And it's really hard to speak right now. I'm not going to lie. Having a hard time. Robin, by the way, thank you so much for the $2. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Kennedy, thank you for the $30. I really appreciate it. It's so kind of you. Thank you so much, Kennedy. I really appreciate it. Thank you.